We've had 10 Pulitzer Prize winners, including Michael Rezendes from Boston, who was the first reporter in the country to break the story of the pedophile priest scandal. And last month, we had a woman named Isabel Rodriguez Nieto, who covered the drug cartels in Juarez, Mexico, perhaps the most dangerous place in the world now for journalists. 63 journalists have been killed in Mexico trying to cover that situation. And she shared with us what it was like to be a journalist in those circumstances. But I can say with great assurance that of all of the people we've had here, I don't think any of our speakers can duplicate the accomplishment of the speaker tonight. Because Matt Winkler, who is here tonight, has built one of the great media institutions in America from scratch. And none of our other speakers had that kind of experience. And by the way, his life, his whole professional life, changed with one phone call. So on November 8th, 1989, Matt Winkler got a phone call, and it changed his life. He was about 35 years old, roughly, in his mid-30s. He was working at the Wall Street Journal. He was already a very successful journalist. He had been in London. He had a career trajectory. He probably could have stayed there for the rest of his career and done very well. And then this phone call comes. It comes from a man that he had profiled a year before while he was a Wall Street Journal reporter. He had profiled this man. And the man's name was Michael Bloomberg. You've heard of Michael Bloomberg? We all had not heard about Michael Bloomberg in 1989. He was not yet the 17th richest man in America, with a fortune of over $30 billion. He was not yet the person who would serve as mayor of New York City for 12 years. But about 8 years before, he came up with this brilliant idea. And the idea was that for people who were in the financial world, information, key information at their fingertips that would enable them to make key decisions about their businesses would be a crucial weapon that they would have to become successful, and he would be the person to provide that information to them, and he would deliver it on terminals right at their desk. And that was his idea. It was a pretty simple idea. It turned out to be revolutionary in the financial world, and he had started this business. But when he called Matt Winkler, he had a different idea. Okay? He said to Matt Winkler, you know, I might be interested in getting in the news business, and I want to talk to you. And that's what changed Matt Winkler's life. In the years since, he and Michael Bloomberg became co-founders of Bloomberg News. The Bloomberg News organization has grown from one employee, Matt Winkler, to 1,900 journalists, operating in 72 countries, producing over 5,000 daily stories about the economy, but also reporting on government and politics in almost every facet of our life. So please join with me in a moment in welcoming Matt. Before we do that, make sure your cell phones are off. If you're a student and you've got to check out with your ID, we'll do it afterwards, not on the way in, but on the way out. What will happen is that Matt will speak for 20 minutes or a half hour and talk about his life and how he's been able to do this. Then he and I will come up here and have a conversation for a few minutes. I'll get a chance to ask him some questions, and then we will throw it open to you. And there'll be microphones on either end here where you can come up and ask Matt Winkler anything that's on your mind. Okay? Are we ready? So please now join with me in welcoming Matt Winkler.
Thank you, Dean Schneider, for that generous introduction. And let me say, I've already had the privilege of enjoying you and your staff, your colleagues, and dare I say, most important, the students here this afternoon. A rare treat for me, and this is one of the most impressive places I've had the privilege to visit And I dare say I look forward to getting to know everybody here better, because I do think this is an extraordinary place. And the best is yet to come, for sure, for all of you. Earlier this month, there was a revelation that instantly dominated Twitter, coast to coast, north to south, east to west. On March 6th, Newsweek published a cover story identifying Dorian Nakamoto as the creator of Bitcoin. This is the so-called digital currency embraced by the Winklevoss twins and loathed by columnist and Nobel laureate Paul Krugman. And Bitcoin, in case you haven't followed it that closely, is appreciated more than gold since its creation in 2009. The story was viral on Reddit and other forms of social media. Hours after Newsweek posted, a group of journalists trailed Nakamoto in a multi-vehicle car chase after he emerged from his home. Now, there were some Bitcoin enthusiasts who immediately said Newsweek had found the wrong man. Then Nakamoto, in a detailed denial through his lawyer, said, "I have no knowledge of, nor have I ever worked on, cryptography, peer-to-peer systems, or alternative currencies." He also said he discontinued his internet service in 2013 because of severe financial distress. Now, it's not often when the hero of the story says he's not the hero, not a supporting member of the cast, not even associated with the production in any way. So now, there's enough doubt about the Newsweek story to justify the question, how can it be trusted? We live in an age when news travels in an instant, when the values of journalism are diminished by technology that allows us to obtain information and misinformation all in a keystroke. Spontaneous expression governs so much of our thinking. When anything asserted on social media instantly becomes accepted as fact. You know, at Bloomberg, we use social media to amplify our best stories. You can follow me on Twitter at Bloomberg Way, or our main handle, Bloomberg News. The facts matter, though, and that's really what I want to talk about a little bit tonight. It's about what news is in an age where spontaneous expression delivered instantly increasingly governs people's perspective, unfortunately their judgment, and even worse, their actions. For what it's worth, my own life really begins kind of humbly, nowhere as flamboyant as Dean Schneider was generous enough to suggest. I actually started my love of news as a newsboy. In a very long time ago, I almost could say another planet really at this point, but I used to deliver newspapers as an adolescent, and I loved the smell of ink, and even got to read what the ink said, and it was something that stayed with me and has remained to this day. And I always wanted to be a newspaper man. And that led me to the Wall Street Journal, which was a newspaper that I admired the most. The reason why I admired most is because I thought it put a premium on telling stories, and of course they all had to be true. And when I joined it, there were no photographs in the paper. It was all words. As Dean Schneider said, one of the stories that I wound up covering in the course of, in the 1980s, exploring financial markets, the financial industry, the economy, was a trend that was just beginning and that we are still dealing with today. The last 2 decades of the 20th century witnessed an explosion of global finance. For the first time, financial markets, not just in the United States, but also in Europe and in Asia, were essentially deregulated. And money, in all its forms, was suddenly the occupation of choice for a growing, emerging class of people worldwide. And this trend would bring together governments, corporations, in currency markets and commodity markets, in really every market that was imaginable. The market that told all the other markets what to do every day in 1979 was the US Treasury market, the US government securities market. And that's really where this story begins. At the time when finance was exploding, there was somebody who was in that industry, Michael Bloomberg, and he, being a physics major when he graduated from college, and soon a graduate of Harvard Business School, brought with him to a firm on Wall Street, Salomon Brothers, a scientific bent. And when he observed the ways in which people did business back in the 70s, he couldn't understand why all these Wall Street journals by everybody's desk, piled high densely, could not be put on a computer so that people could have all this information historically to the present on a computer. And this was a novel idea back in the 70s. People were using in those days Fortran, computer language, which is probably something that most of us have no memory of. Anyway, he, with some difficulty, managed to convince his colleagues that it was worth taking all this data that was in the newspapers and putting them on a computer. And he was allowed to do this, but only in his spare time. So he bribed his back office people with pizza and beer, and they put together what became known as the B page at Salomon Brothers. And by the mid-70s, there was a fledgling computerized system that enabled the people in the firm to make decisions, knowing what they were doing together, collectively. And one advantage that they had is that they could see what prices today were relative to yesterday, last week, 10 weeks ago, 10 years ago, and so on. The reason why this was important is, if you think about it today, probably the most important 2 words all of us deal with in making decisions, making choices, is relative value. We all want to know what's the relative value of whatever it is we're contemplating. Is it better? Is it worse? Is it better today than it was yesterday? Relative value. Surprisingly, in 1979, when he was on the verge of leaving Salomon Brothers, the entire financial industry in the world did not really have a way of looking at relative value. In fact, what would happen every day is that the people who were selling the securities or selling the product were the same people who were providing the information. It would be like General Motors owning Consumer Reports magazine, and we know how hazardous that could be given where General Motors is at the moment. So Mike Bloomberg comes along and he embraces this concept of relative value with his fledgling system. His firm had no appreciation really of what he had accomplished in a merger that resulted in it being acquired in 1981. He was told that he wasn't needed anymore, and so he went out on his own and started his own company and was allowed to leave with what was called the B page, this computer system that did relative value. And to give you some sense of how important this was, in just a few years, the Bloomberg in its infancy became the system of choice for the world's most important fiduciaries, like central banks, pension funds, college endowments, all of which wanted to know whether what they were buying today was cheap or expensive to its alternative, and how did this compare with yesterday and all the yesterdays going back to its origin. And this is how Bloomberg as a company evolved. And it didn't have news in the beginning. It was all data. This was somebody who was a scientist by training, by bent. But one thing that he had done that hadn't occurred to any of the media titans at the time, Time Inc., Dow Jones and Company, Reuters, a company that goes all the way back to Napoleon III, Forbes magazine. None of these companies had thought about taking data, information, prices, yields that existed for at least a century and using them to help people make informed decisions to the present. He was the only person who thought about doing this and did. And if you think about where we are today, we live in a digital age. We live in an age where you could say big data is more important than it ever was. In fact, we have an understanding now of what the promise and the peril of big data is. Mike Bloomberg in 1979 was about to become the system that would embrace big data, and its appetite for data would be insatiable. And so within less than a decade, Bloomberg, with just data, became, as I said, the only system that could explain, inform, and provide relative value to people with the most at stake. When I come into the story, it's relatively late, 8 years after the company started. And what Michael Bloomberg is thinking about at that point is data is great and invaluable, indispensable. But what makes data especially useful is when people have the opportunity to use that data when they're dealing with surprises. And if you think about it, probably the best definition of news is surprise. It's what you don't know. It's what people don't want you to know. And if you have all of the data that's relevant to every surprise that you see, you obviously have an advantage in your understanding and perspective. And so I did get a phone call, having reported on markets and having seen Mike Bloomberg and his company in its infancy. And I was actually quite intimidated because when I looked at the system back then, what I saw in the data was information, perspective that I figured could only be replicated maybe 3 weeks or more from that point. So I was behind the curve already. In any case, the Bloomberg system, when Mike Bloomberg shared it with me, did not have news. And when he suggested that it should have it, what I was thinking about at this point was if one could marry the context and perspective of the best daily, weekly, monthly platforms in journalism with a real-time system providing information, the opportunity existed, and this is now 1990, to create something that really didn't exist. And to put this in perspective, this is 4 years before Netscape introduced the internet to most of us. Apologies to Al Gore. It was, as a system, Bloomberg, digital before the word digital was used. The Bloomberg, in order to operate, was a phone company, was a utility, was a hardware manufacturer, was a software company, and very belatedly a phone company, and finally also a content creator with news. So it was all of these things back in 1990, and it had to be all these things because it was delivering relative value instantly to people real time. I mentioned the data as the most important part of this because what distinguishes Bloomberg News probably more than anything else is that it is driven by its relentless dependence on data. And the reason why that's important in an age of spontaneous expression where what is purportedly news is that unless something can be verified, unless it can be confirmed, unless it can be dependable, it's not clear that it has a real use, or at least a use that can be relied upon. Why is this so important? All of us depend on the information that we have to make the decisions that we do. This is especially important for governments and corporations, which are making decisions every day about what they should be invested in, what markets they should favor, what markets they should avoid. And the information system, the news organization that is able to provide consistently a product that enables people to rely on and depend on has a chance as a business model of succeeding because of its reliability. So as we began in a very fledgling way, we were blessed in that unlike any other news organization at the time, we were a very data-driven, which is another way of saying fact-based news organization. And this enabled us in a relatively short period to create not only a 24-hour, 7 days a week news service, but also to create magazines, monthly magazine, a weekly magazine, Bloomberg Business Week, another quarterly magazine, Bloomberg Pursuits, Bloomberg Television, Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg.com, BloombergBusinessWeek.com, to the extent that at this point there are now something like 24 million unique visitors per month on these sites beyond the Bloomberg terminal. And our mobile products probably reach a global audience of more than 10 million unique users a month. The most important part of what we do at Bloomberg News actually starts with 5 words, and it's in the Bloomberg Way, which all of you will have the benefit of receiving today. All of these things at Bloomberg that are important are, as I said, 5 words that begin with the letter F, and it's not the one you're thinking of. We want to be the first word, because if you're not the first word, it's hard to say you're in the news business. We want to be the fastest word because, again, events are constantly changing, they're unfolding, and unless you are the fastest word, it's hard to see how you can be the first word. It isn't news unless it's true, so we want to be the most factual word. Probably the hardest part of any event as it unfolds is being able to be the final word, to be definitive. And probably the hardest part is to give some indication of what today's events mean in the context of tomorrow, which is the future word. And so the first word, the fastest word, the most factual word, the final word, and the future word all are required as part of delivering what is now Bloomberg News. And in a period where people are constantly dealing with misinformation, the Bloomberg Way is sort of an indispensable guide to enabling our reporters and editors to provide perspective and context. Let me just give you some examples of what has unfolded more recently and how this matters. You may recall last year a very important Supreme Court decision in June. Before I get to that, just want to say that in order to do the 5 Fs, in order to succeed, the most important part of success is preparation, being prepared, which is why when we conceived Bloomberg News in 1990, one of the things we were thinking about is how to anticipate events on the calendar, how to anticipate outcomes. For example, every week in hundreds of locations, we have to report on economic data. And we know 3 things about that data. The inflation figure can be greater than what is forecast by economists. The inflation figure can be less than what is forecast by economists, or the inflation figure can be very much what is the forecast by economists. We know that's going to be the possible outcome every time we cover these events. So instead of waiting for the event to unfold, we go into every event thinking about these outcomes, preparing pretty rigorously for them in the form of stories that are not ready to be published, but could be the one that is the first word and the fastest word and the most factual word, the final word, and the future word. And last June, we knew that the Supreme Court would rule on a very important case having to do with gay marriage. And our Supreme Court reporter had 13 different outcomes for that Supreme Court decision. So it's like having 13 different stories ready to go. And the reason why he had 13 is because he is a lawyer by training, but a journalist by preference. And he, being data-driven, being schooled at Bloomberg, and the whole relative value approach, went into the day of this decision with an understanding that there were probably 13 ways that the court could rule on this case. He actually had 19 leads for his story, or I should say stories. It wasn't too much of a surprise to us that he was first to report the Roberts Court decision on gay marriage in June last year. But it was surprising to a lot of people because, you know, we're a news organization that is dedicated to covering the economy, covering markets, covering finance, and so forth. But this is also a big event that certainly affects business and certainly affects the way people live. And the reason why he was first is because he had anticipated the Roberts decision that actually discredited the Commerce Clause, which is what everybody was looking for as a justification for it. And so while other news organizations actually misreported that decision back in June, he was first to report it. He's the same reporter, by the way, who years earlier was able to be very competitive and also first reporting the outcome of the 2001 Supreme Court decision that made George Bush president. More recently, we have reporters in London who last spring began looking at the currency markets. This is probably the biggest tradable market in the world. It's global, as you would expect, because it involves everybody's currency. And what our reporters discovered in there, just looking at the data, is that every afternoon, about 10 minutes before the fix of these currencies, the so-called fix at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, there would be sudden fluctuations in prices of the currencies every day. And this was explained as window dressing, as nothing more than a mechanical process leading to the determination of what the final price would be. But our reporters, the more they looked at it, found it to be unexplainable. And as a result of that, as a result of looking at this unusual pattern of trading in currencies just before the benchmark rates were set, they were able to confirm that actually what was going on, has been going on for years, is essentially a group of people working together, sharing information, and manipulating the price to their benefit in a daily session. And since their reporting, regulators on several continents, including regulators in Europe, Asia, the Justice Department, the FBI, and state regulators have become part of the process of investigating this outcome. You know, its value, I guess, could be summed up in a Columbia Journalism Review item recently that said this is a multi-trillion-dollar-a-day market that suddenly cleaned itself up dramatically after Bloomberg's report put regulators on the trail. So I'm talking to you today in part to make it clear that speed and accuracy are not mutually exclusive. Market moving in business news doesn't just affect markets or business, it affects society in general. You know, at Bloomberg, we're all reporters and editors going through every day a challenge of sifting through more and more information that is spontaneously delivered, often hazardous, often incomplete. But you know, what we have gained from the process is something that's very old-fashioned, which is that the facts are ever more important. And fortunately, in a time and place where we can have access to facts with greater speed, with greater completeness than ever before, it suggests that the future of journalism actually is brighter than it's probably ever been. It just remains for us to recognize the tools that are at our disposal and how we can go about using them. So I would like to leave it there so that I can let Howard do the rest. Thank you very much.
So come join me. There were some things I took comfort from just listening to the background. How many of you, anybody physics majors out there? You've got a great future if you're a physics major. There we go. The other thing is, I don't know if you picked up on the fact that Mike Bloomberg was fired by his company, and that's what eventually led him to start his own business, and he was so successful. So if you get fired sometime in your life, take comfort upon the fact that it may actually be a silver lining. Not always, by the way, but sometimes. I want you to tell us a little bit more about your job interview with Mike Bloomberg. So here he is. He calls you up. He says, okay, Matt, come see me. I'm thinking of going into the news business. Maybe you'll get involved. So what did he ask you? What was that first interview? Many of you are going to be going for your first interview, so you should pay attention. What was it like?
Well, first of all, knowing him as I did, and I knew him fairly well at this point, because having interviewed him several times, as you said, more than a year earlier, I was more than familiar with him. And he was not an insignificant person to begin with. So he calls me and he says, I need some advice. And I said, you? Me? I mean, knowing him as I did, he didn't need advice from anybody, let alone a reporter. But he said, what would it take to get in the news business? And I again said, you? Sort of incredulous, because what did he know about news? He had no background or experience in it. And he said, well, I'm serious. And I thought about it, and I actually could think of only one thing to ask him, which was, suppose your reporter has written a story about your biggest customer. And at that point, he had one very big customer. And the reporter has discovered that the chairman of the company, who is your biggest customer, has absconded with $10 million from the company's treasuries, water skiing with his secretary in South America. The story is true, and you get a call from the president of your biggest customer who says, Mike, you know, we can't have this story on the Bloomberg, so you're going to have to remove it, or we're going to remove all of the terminals that are on our trading floor. And I said to Michael Bloomberg, so what do you do? And he didn't bat an eye. He just smiled and said, my lawyers will love you.
So that convinced you that he was going to allow you, and this is crucial, and we talk about this all the time in news literacy, this was going to allow you the editorial independence, the separation from his commercial interests and your editorial interests.
Nobody had a better grasp of the integrity. Nobody I had dealt with had an immediate instinctive grasp of the integrity of the news business as he did. He got it instantly. And so after that, what I was thinking about more than anything else was he was in a position to take this data that he had done amazing things with. No company had done what he had done with relative value. And marrying it to news just seemed to me an incredible combination.
So this was an easy decision for you. You didn't have to go home to Lisa and agonize over this, right? Your wife who's here. You were saying, I'm going, right? I'm leaving my job, I'm doing this, right?
Well, I thought it was when he said, I'm going to do it, you're going to do it for me, when can you start?
That's not bad.
And I said, you got to be kidding, at the time, because it just seemed wild. But I did say to him, I'll let you know tomorrow.
So you went home to sleep.
So I did have a conversation with my significant other and others. And what I thought about was, more than anything else, if I said no, I'd always be wondering what would have been it like if I had done it. So that was enough of a reason to say yes.
So you opt for the adventure in this case?
Well, I didn't want to go through life having regrets.
So tell me, so you're running this major news organization, you're delivering news. What's the toughest decisions you have to make as the head of this group? Give me some examples of the kind of decision-making you go through or tough decisions you face.
Well, look, the most important thing is accuracy above all else.
Okay.
Always has, always will be. So, I look at hundreds of stories, sometimes in a day. And what I'm thinking about more than anything else is it complete? And is it transparent? And
so define transparent so everybody understands what you mean.
What I mean by transparent is that a reader can have as much confidence as possible in the integrity of the reporting and can be confident that it is reliable. That's really what I think about more than anything else.
So for the people here who are news consumers, and there's great confusion now given the flood of information, disinformation, assertion, verification, what are the tips you give them for enabling them to spot this reliability? What should they look for? What are the 2 or 3 things that will help them spot this kind of accuracy and reliability? What do they need to do and look for?
There's an Arab proverb that goes something like, luck begins when preparation meets opportunity, meaning that the more you prepare, the more prepared you are, the more conscious you are of collecting all the information you need, the more opportunity you have to write the story that will be the first word and the fastest word.
But I'm on the other side. Now I get a story that President Obama, during the government shutdown, has decided to personally fund a Muslim museum. And I read the story, and it's moving on a lot of news outlets, right? I'm a consumer, right? You're concerned about accuracy from a journalistic point of view, your employees. What's your advice to us about what to look for when I'm looking at that story to tell me if it's reliable or not?
Attribution.
So tell me more about attribution. What do you mean by attribution?
You know, every assertion should be sourced with a transparent, definitive, confirming authority.
Never use anonymous sources?
Well, you use anonymous sources all the time, but you even have to make it clear with anonymous sources that you've talked to 3 people, 4 people, 2 people that are familiar with the matter or familiar with the situation, which is another way of saying talk to the people who are in a position to know. You know, transparent sourcing is much better than opaque sourcing.
Transparent meaning I described, characterize who the source might be, even if I don't name them, how he or she is in a position to know something.
Yeah, I mean, in the example that you cite, that should have been clear right away that it was an incomplete and hazardous piece of reporting because there was no attribution in it. It was just asserted. Much of what you read today, unfortunately, that is tweeted, that is, you know, on YouTube or whatever, is incompletely sourced. And so you have to know that it's suspect until you see more.
So it's the sourcing. It's the key is looking for the source of the information. How are they in a position to know what they know? How is it supported in the story, right? And to kind of take the time to do that as a consumer if you're not going to get fooled and misled. Let me ask you a question a little bit about your operations globally, because you're now a global media outlet, and you're working in 72 countries, and you're working in countries that have no tradition of a free press, some, no tradition. and you're playing by different rules. You're in Russia, you're in China. What is it like for you? What are the challenges operating in that kind of environment?
Most of the time, the Bloomberg way enables us to do a great deal of work because, after all, what we're after is collecting lots of facts. And as long as the facts are there to be collected, as long as they are facts that can be verified and replicated by anybody else as well, we're probably, most of the time, on safe ground. Having said that, wherever we are, we have to obey the laws of the land. And the laws of the land from one place to the next are not the same as the United States, of course, or even in places like the UK, for example, libel laws are very different from libel laws here. Covering courts in the UK is very different from covering court cases here. So you have to be aware of what the laws are. And to have a business, you have to be law-abiding. But you can do, extraordinary journalism everywhere if you follow the facts, wherever they take you. I mean, there are just lots of opportunities that come from that process.
So in China, you've had some controversy. So in 2012, you do a terrific story about the family wealth of the then emerging head of the party, who's now the president of China, right? What happens as a result of that story?
Well, it was all based on public documents, every bit of it. And so there was nothing that couldn't be verified by anybody else if they had looked at the documents that we obtained. But it was a story that was not received favorably, and our website was blocked, and it remains blocked, and we are...
And you can't get any new residency visas for your reporters, right?
Well, fortunately, we're still operating there with a robust staff, but it's not, as easy as we would like it to be.
So the Chinese are making it more difficult, and you're doing the best you can.
Absolutely.
So then there was another controversial case involving a story that was not published, and it may not have been ready, as you indicated, earlier this year, in which there was another story about a tycoon and his ties to some of the top Chinese officials. The story was reported in the New York Times and elsewhere that you did not publish that story for fear of what kind of economic consequences it might have to the Bloomberg business. You forcibly denied that. Just give us the background to that story and what was going through your mind, because you are making the key decision that the story's not ready.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't even a story. It was reporting that had not gotten to that point. And exactly what we said before, it wasn't ready.
Is it still in progress, or?
What we do in our reporting, we don't share until we're ready.
So we're not that transparent, right?
Well, it would be actually inappropriate to discuss reporting before it's ready to be published.
I understand. And then finally this week, the chairman, and the chairman of Bloomberg, Peter Grauer, seems to indicate that the editorial side should be reconsidering some of the investigative work they do on the grounds, and I don't want to misstate this, so correct me, that Bloomberg is basically a news organization to report on finance and business and actionable information, and they're doing business in China. It's a big emerging market. You need to sell these terminals in China. And now you're getting a lot of people in China upset with this investigative reporting, and maybe you should reconsider that. So what's your reaction?
Well, I said last week, the news judgment of Bloomberg has and always will be determined by Bloomberg News. And more recently, earlier this week, the founder of this company said words to the same effect. So there it is.
So that was reassuring to you?
I hope it is to everybody.
That goes back to that first question, right, about the editorial independence? Right. As much as you can?
Yeah.
Don't you have great leverage? So do the Chinese, in terms of their economic future, don't they need your terminals? I mean, wouldn't it be useful?
I like to think they do.
So don't you have any leverage with them? I mean, can't you say, okay, we won't do business with you. You don't let us operate. We're a journalistic. That's the commercial side versus the journalistic side of the company. here, right?
You know, the best way to succeed is to let our reporting speak for itself, always. And that's what we do. And if you look at our work over now 24 years, it really does speak for itself in all sorts of ways. And we shouldn't be conducting business any other way as a news organization. We should let the reporting speak for itself.
So there's another controversial kind of policy you have. You have a couple. One, and then I'm going to come back to this, involves the hiring of people. We'll come back to that. But one is you never report about yourself. And I think that was a decision that you made, if I'm not incorrect, early on. We're not going to report on our own company. We are not going to report on Michael Bloomberg. Many other news organizations, as you know, will report on themselves on the grounds that that demonstrates a level of independence and transparency when they report on themselves. But you're not reporting on yourself, and in some cases you're letting other people speak about information that you might be able to even correct. Why not? Why not report about your own company and Mike Bloomberg?
Well, it's an obvious conflict of interest. Anyway, I mean, anybody who is reporting on themselves has an obvious conflict. And so we agreed early on, as you say, that it was just not an approach that made a lot of sense, given the inherent conflicts of reporting on ourselves. And we, figured that, look, there'll be plenty of people who will report on us anyway.
But isn't there a danger they'll get it wrong and you can get it right?
There's always a danger, but we haven't done too badly, over 24 years.
So Mike Bloomberg he's re-engaged now, right? He's finished being mayor, needs something to do, so he's back up and getting involved. So tell me what life is like now with Mayor Bloomberg, no longer mayor, and now re-engaged in the company he never could get involved in while he was a mayor, and what's happening in your company and what impact it might have.
He's unique and we're unique because of him. And so with that as a premise, it's just a big thrill to have him back. Nobody has as much to do with us as he does, obviously. And so to have the creator, the founder in our midst is a gift that keeps on giving.
Although he has one policy, we talked about this a little bit, that he insisted upon, and you weren't sure you agreed. So if you go to work for Bloomberg, any of you, here's the condition. If you leave the company for any reason, you can never come back.
That's not true.
Or if you go to someplace else, you can't come back. That's not true? I'm sorry, so I stand corrected. Go ahead.
Actually, his policy is that if you leave and go work for a competitor.
A competitor, okay.
Now, that's a pretty broad noun in his opinion, but you can go into public service and come back. You can go into academia and come back. You can do all kinds of endeavors that make the world a better place with your charity, with your philanthropy, and you can return. All he was saying is, if you leave us now, what do I say to the people who stayed? And that's the way he thinks.
So you've never hired back an editorial employee who's gone to another news organization in the 25 years?
I have not.
You have not? Okay.
It's not been my decision anyway.
So let me just ask you a couple of questions, then we're going to throw it open. Tell us what your day is like. You tell the people here what it's like, when do you start, what is it like, a quick summary.
It starts early most of the time.
How early?
4 a.m.
4 a.m., okay. You get up, you do what?
The first thing I do is I get ready for the day and I look at, because I have in my hand sort of a command of the world digitally, and I can see what we are reporting, I can see what others are reporting, and I can also answer or address any messages that require immediate attention if I have to. So in my first hours, I'm just sort of getting ready for the day, and also I'm multitasking, obviously. You know what that's like. And I have the ability to just sort of see pretty much the world. I'm looking mostly at the Asian day ending. I'm looking at the European day unfolding. It's, in the morning, late morning in the European day. It's the end of the day in Asia. And of course, the day hasn't really begun yet in the US, but I'm already thinking about it and what is most important. The next hour of the day, 5 to 6, I'm often talking to people from Asia and getting a sense of what we've done and what's going on. Same thing in Europe. And then when I get to the office, usually about 5:45, the first set of meetings usually begin around 6 o'clock because, again, it's the end of the Asian day. And so I try to get in as many meetings as I can with people. We've always been internationally minded as a company, as a news organization. And the meetings go on. And then the first big news meeting is at 7:30 globally with all parts of the world engaged. Then there are probably more editorial discussions following that meeting. I generally look at several stories somewhere in the middle of all this. And then the next big meeting is at 10 o'clock. And that's also a global news meeting. And then more story meetings.
I'm getting tired.
And usually I leave sometime after 5 o'clock.
So does that
and then as I'm leaving, I can look at more stories if I want to.
Sounds great. I'm glad I left the newspaper business, I'll tell you. So does that leave you room for anything else in your life? I mean, have you regret that there were things that you would have liked to develop, other sides of your personality? I mean, you've been very successful, but does it come at some price? What haven't you gotten to do that you might have wanted to do, given this kind of pace?
Actually, I don't really have any regrets. I try to spend as much time with my wife as I can. It's my priority.
Good.
And my children and my
No sides of your personality or anything that you would have loved to do that you...
Well, actually, we spent a lot of time road biking. And enjoy it immensely.
Okay.
For a while, I was very engaged in studying classical guitar while I was doing all this. So
good. Last question before I throw it open. I want to take you back to the 1970s. You remember the 1970s?
I do.
And I want you to go back to Kenyon College, and I want to tell you about what somebody who knew you said about you in college. Now, you were the newspaper editor in college, right, when you were like a freshman, which was real rare. And he said that you were passionate about certain things. And as a result, a lot of people were mad at you because what you were passionate about, you were really passionate about. What were you passionate about when you were in college? Do you remember?
Sure. The first story that got me into trouble, so it started early, was sort of a business story, an economic story, and it was the cost of fraternities rushing freshmen. How much money the fraternities spent
during the rush process
to convince freshmen to join fraternities. And it was a sort of, I thought at the time, rather dry, analytical piece that was a bunch of facts, really, from one fraternity to the next, sort of a survey. But again, it's the early 70s, as you said, and fraternities were very entrenched and were outraged by the reporting. So I was a couple things. One was besieged with letters that accused the story of being sensational journalism. I was hauled before the journalism board and admonished.
You were admonished before a board? There was a board that
There was a board that...
And they called you and they admonished you?
They told me, and I printed the admonishment on the front page in the next issue.
Good for you.
And then I was accosted by some of the members of the fraternity. And
so I gather you were not a fraternity person, right? You
didn't
rush.
Well, my
fraternity
was the newspaper.
Right.
And that's where I belonged.
Good.
I was an ink-stained wretch.
That's great. All right, on that note, I want to throw it open to some questions. Questions for Matt Winkler. There are microphones here. some students. We're going to try to get as many questions as we can in the next 10 or 15 minutes. Do not hold back anything you want to ask him. This is your chance.
Hello, my name is Ariel Martinez, and I would like to know what your reaction was to Ben Richardson's resignation from Bloomberg this week amidst this controversy about reporting in China.
You want to, Ariel, you want to report the question? Report. You want to repeat the question?
What was your reaction to Ben Richardson's resignation from Bloomberg this week?
The resignation?
Yes.
The person who resigned this week from Bloomberg, who left, okay?
We don't discuss personnel.
We don't discuss personnel. Okay, question.
Hi, I'm Siobhan Becker, and I wanted to know when the reporters presented you with the story about China's wealth, what were they missing from their report?
Again, we're having trouble. Give me the last part of that. Just when you speak into the mic, we're having some problems. Give me the last part of the question.
What were the reporters missing from their report on Chinese wealth?
Okay, so the question is, and we started to talk about this, you talked about the story that was not ready for publication and it wasn't quite a story and it was missing, and so what was it missing?
We don't talk about stories unless we publish them.
I understand.
And that's what I said.
Yes, you did. So we're not going to talk about what's missing because it's a story in progress. And many news organizations will not talk about
I would
their
say
work.
a lot of them would do exactly what I just said.
Right. But just talk maybe about, quickly, the levels of verification you're going to require in general for those kinds of stories.
You know, every story that we do, we like to think is fresh, is revealing, is not covering something that has already been reported. That's number one. Number two is it complete in its detail? And that's always, you know, a big test for any story. And I am not really saying anything that is original to Bloomberg. I'd like to think all news organizations abide by that.
Okay, but this is your decision, right? You're the editor.
Actually, there are many editors involved, and most of the time, I am, you know, really the last person to sign off on something.
So they've made the decisions
because most of the decisions have already been made.
Okay, good. Question.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening, Matt. Stephanie Mitchell, student of the 70s.
Student of the 70s.
I remember the days of Watergate. I was down there as an intern. Saw Henry Kissinger with newspapers this deep every day. As you have your hand on the pulse in the morning, everything takes time when you're seeking truth. I'm a consumer. I recently went through a very difficult time where my family was in Charleston, West Virginia, with a huge socioeconomic impact of a chemical leak contaminating 100,000 homes and 300,000 people. You may or may not know this story, but it was the capital city. And seeking truth in that as a consumer, it was very frustrating that it wasn't being covered on the news because Chris Christie was being covered through the news at the time with the George Washington Bridge disaster. So I wanted to ask you, I had often thought if I could just push a button and have some organization with credibility, which I think Bloomberg News has, that could pull the world into my fingertip and show me quantitatively who's covering a story, and then be able to source my information in truth that way, because I know my benchmarks of truth. It's not Facebook. I know my benchmarks of truth and what media I trust, but I don't have the ability like you do to wake up at 4 in the morning, except for in the same age group, we do wake up at 4 in the morning. I would like very much to be able to have the world at my fingertips. I predict within the next 10 years I will have the advantages that you have, and you'll have more advantages. But how can we do that? How can we bridge that gap? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah.
Because civil defense and these sorts of disasters, from the Fukushima prefecture disaster, from the tsunami and all of that that's still going on, and what we experienced in West Virginia, the mudslides and so on, this is civil defense, this is socioeconomics, and this is going to have impact on us throughout the world.
You know, I was in a class that you created here that I think is one of the most innovative programs I've seen anywhere, which is meant to treat both the journalist and the consumer of news alike, and dare I say, in a way, both indifferently. And what is great about this program is what it teaches is how to read information in such a way, how to read the news in such a way so that you can identify, what is incomplete and what's missing. And I think that's really important. And I think what we're talking about here is a discriminating listener, a discriminating reader, viewer. I said earlier, it's really important that you are thinking about how do we know this, how is this asserted, what are the facts that are backing it up. I think the course that's taught here in many ways goes a long way to addressing that. But I would say also, and what I was suggesting earlier, sort of in closing, is that we have more tools at our disposal today to access information than we ever had before. And if we know where to look and we know what to look for, we actually have the ability to be much better informed today, maybe than we've ever been, which is why I think the outlook for news is more encouraging in some ways than it's ever been, because all of us have the ability to go find the answers to some of the most difficult challenges, and they're literally a keystroke away or two. And so I would say you have as much ability to do that as I do, really, and you can be as discriminating about it as I can.
Where's the questioner, the person who asked the question? Just stand up for a second. So we teach the course that Matt's referring to. We teach a course for those of you in the community called News Literacy. It's a course on how to be a discriminating news consumer, and we've been teaching it almost to 10,000 students. It's not for journalism students. Dean, you want to stand up for a second? Dean is the director of that program. If anybody in the community is interested in this course or ordering this course next fall, you should see Dean after the lecture, okay? Because it's a course designed for that. Okay, what are we up to? Let's try to speed up the questions.
Hi, my name is Jimin Kim, and my question is, why did you choose to come speak at Stony Brook? Was it our news literacy program? Did you find something admirable about our hardworking blue-collar attitude? Why did you choose to speak to...
So we pay him to ask, no.
Why did you choose to come speak to me and my colleagues here other than those at Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism?
Because there are a number of superlatives about Stony Brook that I think are in some ways far more important than many of the established programs in journalism that I'm all too familiar with. First of all, this is a state university. This is the first state university in New York that actually has a journalism program, if I'm not mistaken. So that's the first superlative. The people who come to Stony Brook are about as diverse as any group of students as I can think of, which again is not really the case with so many other programs that are historically catering to a very predictable graduate and undergraduate population. Stony Brook, by contrast, is very international. It's also very local at the same time. One of the sort of defining, I think, characteristics of Bloomberg as a company, and Bloomberg News especially, is that we've always been internationally minded, and our international mindedness is shaped in large part because we're local. And what I mean by that is, yes, we have more than 1,900 journalists, but most of us are not American. Most of us work outside the United States. Most of us at Bloomberg News speak English as a second language, and I dare say many of us speak it better than I do. And so the world that I come from, which is very international and very aware of, really the diversity in the world, makes me very eager to be in a place like this and to visit with you. So it had enormous appeal, and I was just waiting for the chance to be able to arrange it on the calendar to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Question.
Hi, my name is Chris. I have a question regarding the Bloomberg style of writing, because we're learning the Associated Press style of writing here. So I read an article in Business Insider that said Bloomberg doesn't allow its reporters to use the word "but" in their reporting. So I want to know what you have against butts.
What do you have against butts is the question.
Actually, if you cared to do a word search of that word today or yesterday, or actually any day of the week or any month, or cared to do a word search of Bloomberg Business Week or Bloomberg Markets Magazine or Bloomberg Pursuits, you would find more butts than I can count. Now, all kidding aside, what is the origin of that guidance, I should say, in the Bloomberg way, which says, and it's about a lot of words, and the difficulty we observed very early on in Bloomberg News is that, and it mostly came from writing that was perhaps a little bit lazier than it needed to be, and writing that was probably less experienced than it needed to be, those two things. And what we are after, if you read the Bloomberg Way, is clarity above all else, precision in language and clarity. And when we would observe a story that was, say, 800 words, and there were 17 sentences that began with the clause "but," we figured the reader might be confused, might have, less understanding of what was unfolding. And so we said, if you're going to use "but," be careful, because the last thing you want to do is confuse the reader. But, the real answer to your question is that the word happily resides at Bloomberg too, and I can't do anything about it.
In the Bloomberg Way, which is this book, and we have 100 copies in the journalism office we're going to distribute, it explains a little bit about the "but," and it uses sentences without it and with it, and there are some cases where the "but" just slows you down and puts you in another direction unnecessarily. So that was, I think, the thing. We're going to try to squeeze in 2 more questions. Very quick answers. Question.
Hello, Mr. Winkler. You said that you have to follow the facts no matter what, where they may lead you, but you also said that you need to follow the laws established in the countries in which you work in, and these are these two ideas kind of like conflict in places like China and Russia. So my question is, as editor-in-chief in Bloomberg News, where do you draw the line between a story that might hurt your company and profits and remain ethical?
Well, first of all, any story that we publish, we believe in and we publish. And that's, if you look at, what we've done, obviously that's borne out and that's true. But, see, I used the word "but." Every news organization, not just ours, has to follow the license that is given to it to operate as a news organization in the country that's in. We are by no means alone in this. There isn't a news organization that doesn't have to follow wherever it operates, basic laws of the license. And we're no different than anybody else. So I wouldn't say that our situation is unique. I'd say every large news organization that operates around the world as we do has to deal with essentially the same challenges.
Last question, and I apologize for those of you still online. I really apologize. We're trying to make this as quick as we can. Okay, so this better be good. No pressure. It's your last question, okay? All right, introduce yourself.
My name's Andrew.
Andrew?
If you wanted a news consumer to know one thing about Bloomberg News, what would it be?
Did you hear the question?
Yeah.
Did everybody hear the question? If Matt wanted news consumers to know one thing, just one thing about Bloomberg News, one thing, what would it be?
I guess obvious answer, and I hope it's not an original one. Integrity above all else.
And you define integrity as?
Being faithful to getting events reported, as I said, with the greatest precision and accuracy.
Okay. On that note, I want to thank Matt. Please join with me in thanking Matt.